And welcome to this busy news night. Tonight on Hannity, in just a few minutes, Sarah Carter with Circa News, Senator Ted Cruz, Sheriff David Clark, Larry Elder, Geraldo Rivera, Michael Cohen. They'll all join us. But first, today, multiple damning new reports reveal that former Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice was the person who requested that the names of the Trump transition team members who were caught up in surveillance be unmasked. She has a lot of explaining to do, and that's tonight's very important opening monologue. All right, for weeks right here on this program, we have been demanding answers about who knew what and when about the surveillance of President Trump, candidate Trump, and of course, members of his transition team. Also tonight, we appear to have a very important key piece of this very complex puzzle. Now, Fox's own Adam Housley, he's going to join us in a few minutes with a full report. He is revealing that, quote, the unmasked names of people associated with Donald Trump were then sent to all of those at the National Security Council and some at the Defense Department, then Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, and then CIA Director John Brennan, essentially the officials at the top, including former Rice Deputy Ben Rhodes. Now, this proves the surveillance was widespread, and it was known by a lot of people, and there's more. Intel sources now tell Sarah Carter with Circa News, who will also join us tonight, that the unmasking of names connected with the Trump team, quote, appeared to begin last July, around the time that Trump secured the GOP nomination, and accelerated after Trump's election in November, launched a transition that continued through January. Now, Circa News is also reporting that most, if not all, had nothing to do with Russia. And that's not all tonight. Eli Lake with Bloomberg View, who will also join us tonight, reported today, quote, one U.S. official familiar with the report said they contain valuable political information on the Trump transition team, such as whom the Trump team was meeting, the views of Trump associates on foreign policy matters, and plans for the incoming administration. And just 2 weeks ago, Susan Rice, she was specifically asked during an interview on PBS if she knew about members of the Trump team being caught up in, quote, incidental surveillance. She says no. Watch this.
I began by asking about the allegations leveled today by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes that Trump transition officials, including the president, may have been swept up in surveillance of foreigners at the end of the Obama administration.
I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Nunes on that count today.
Oh, really? I know nothing about that? Well, that's what you just heard her say. Was she lying in that clip? Well, new reports today indicate yes. Yes, she was. Now, keep in mind, this new information about Susan Rice comes on the heels of the smoking gun tape that was uncovered last week that we played on the program of former Obama official Dr. Evelyn Farkas admitting not only surveillance took place, but the names were also unmasked and they wanted them leaked. Now, tonight, we are demanding answers to these questions. You American people, you now have a right to know. For example, what justification did Susan Rice have to unmask these names? That's pretty unprecedented. What did Ben Rhodes know? What did the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, know? What did the former CIA Director, John Brennan, know? Was this done for pure political purposes under the ruse of national security? And more importantly, what did then President Obama know? And when did he know it? Did President Obama and members of his administration, did they knowingly surveil an opposition party or an incoming president? America deserves answers tonight. Now, before we get to that, we bring in a new report. Adam, this is a huge deal and a big development. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, Sean, we started researching this, last week when we started getting some of our sources talking to us. You mentioned Eli Lake. I know he's on your show later. He was the first one that came out to actually say it was Susan Rice. We had a belief it was Susan Rice also. But, of course, we had so much information coming in. You got to make sure we get it right first, which we did. So we can say that multiple sources tell Fox News that the former National Security Advisor under President Obama, Susan Rice, requested to unmask the names of Trump transition officials. The unmasked names are people associated with Donald Trump, were all then sent, as you mentioned, to the NSC, some at DOD, James Clapper, John Brennan, basically all the people at the top, including former Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes. Now, these names, we're told, were in part of incidental electronic surveillance and of candidate Trump, President-elect Donald Trump as well, and people close to him, including his family members, some of them as well, for up to a year, we're told, before he took office. Now, when names of Americans are incidentally collected, for those at home who don't know, they're supposed to be masked, meaning the names are redacted from reports, whether it's international or domestic collection, unless it's an issue of national security or crime, or if their security is threatened in any way. But there are loopholes and ways to unmask through some back channels, but Americans are supposed to be protected from incidental collection. Our sources say in this case they were not. Now, this all comes in the wake of Evelyn Farkas's television interview that you mentioned last month. The former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Obama said this in part.
I was urging my former colleagues and frankly speaking, the people on the Hill, it was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration.
Meantime, we're also told that House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes knew about the unmasking and leaking back in January, well before President Trump's tweet in March alleging wiretapping. Our sources say, quote, the intelligence agencies slow-rolled Nunes. He could have seen the logs at other places besides the White House SCIF, which is the secure room where he and other chairmen have looked at this stuff in the past. But it had already been weeks, and he hadn't been able to get the information, so he went to the White House because he could protect his sources, and he could also get those logs, so it was twofold, end quote. Also, keep in mind, as the Obama administration left office, it approved new rules which gave the NSA much broader powers by relaxing rules about sharing intercepted personal communications and the ability to share those with 16 other U.S. intelligence agencies. And Sean, I should also mention that Susan Rice, I know you covered this as well as we did in regards to Benghazi, but she was the one that went on the Sunday shows claiming it was a video. And now we know all along, we know that attack had nothing to do with a video, Sean.
All right, Adam, great reporting. We really appreciate it. We're going to stay on it. Joining us now with more from Bloomberg View, Eli Lake from CircaNews.com, Sarah Carter. Eli, let's start with you. Welcome to the program. All right, so incidental surveillance. This is what Devin Nunes was talking about. Okay, but what bothered him? Now we find out Susan Rice seemingly is purposefully unmasking the names of people, but only Trump transition team's member, or maybe even then candidate Trump, what those conversations were if they were picked up, quote, incidentally. Why is that dangerous, and why should the American people understand the seriousness of this?
Well, I want to just stress that I don't know other things that she requested to be unmasked, but the way I understand this is that the National Security Council staffer who was brought in for Trump, who was doing a review of the unmasking policy, noticed an anomaly in the patterns of requests from Susan Rice to unmask the names that were incidentally collected in summaries of basically raw intelligence of monitored communications. That was then discovered by this staffer, whose name has been out there. He then takes that to the general counsel's office in the White House, who then look into this some more and have tried to make this available to first Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, but also Adam Schiff, the ranking member of that committee. And they've also offered this to the Senate Intelligence Committee.
All right. And Sarah, so why would Susan Rice, especially as it relates to everything that we have been talking about, take incidental surveillance and ask, this is raw intelligence, ask for the unmasking, but only seemingly in the case of the Trump transition team, or perhaps even Trump as a candidate? How dangerous is that when the White House, an administration, a sitting administration, is surveilling and using legitimate surveillance to basically surveil on an opposition party?
Sean, it's extremely concerning because I think those are the questions that need to be asked directly of Susan Rice. I attempted to reach out to her a number of times just to ask her those exact same questions, but she did not return my phone calls.
Shocking.
But what I want to step back, because what we're looking at is not just the expansion. Remember last week, Sean, you and I discussed this. 702, Section 702 of the 12333 executive order is supposed to protect Americans from being unmasked. But if we go back to the stories that we wrote last week, in 2011, that was expanded. The FISA court signed off under the Obama administration to allow for more leniency in unmasking. So it wasn't like it's almost as if it was legalized without us knowing it. And so the unmasking was allowed to occur. So in 2011, then in 2015, they relaxed the laws even more. So what they were able to do is, and we know it went to Susan Rice. We know former CIA Director John Brennan was allowed to do this, and Clapper. So they had the ability to request unmasked American intercepts, foreign, raw intelligence,
that
highly
should never
classified.
have, even if it was legitimate intelligence gathering, they're basically using that as a means to spy on innocent Americans without the benefit of a warrant. Good way to put it.
And that's certainly, yes, and that's certainly what intelligence sources are saying. They're saying, look, this isn't just about just the unmasking. It's about why did they specifically unmask Susan Rice in particular at this point from July? Right, we're going all the way back to July.
What could be the logical reason short of they wanted to use legitimate intelligence gathering as a ruse to get to the Trump transition team and maybe even candidate Trump if it goes back to July?
If it goes back to July, these are the questions they have to ask. And according to the sources that I've spoken with, it goes back to July. It happened again in November, and then it happened exponentially after November through January. So they were looking at this. Other sources that we've spoken to just recently, as of today, have said to us, and these are high-level senior intelligence sources, said these questions need to be asked. Now, they could have been looking at it because some sources are saying,
But, all right, standard operating procedure is you do not identify the identity of an American because you don't have a warrant for that surveillance. Standard operating procedure is when you're writing up a report, they would usually put in American and identify nobody. But in this specific cases, we have Susan Rice asking for the names of those people. More with Eli and Sarah right after this break. Also later tonight, Senator Ted Cruz is here with the very latest on whether Republicans will be able to push through a confirmation vote for Judge Gorsuch. And later tonight,
they're sticking to what I think is a very unconstitutional and un-American policy and trying to intimidate us into being what I've called fugitive slave catchers.
The mayor of Newark, New Jersey, making outrageous claims against the Trump administration for trying to protect Americans living in sanctuary cities. Geraldo Rivera, Sheriff David Clark, they have a shootout coming up on this busy news night tonight here on Hannity.